So last week I rebuilt the carburetor on this 1970 about, according to the code on here, it's right here. It's a 1970 Monojet. Now for the filter on these, they're inside the carburetor. There's a hole in the stock filter on one side and it's flat on the other. It's often mixed up on Rochester carburetors. So the spring goes in to hold it tight and the filter goes in. There's a washer that goes in, and you really should use, especially with these old carburetors that have a lot of wear, Teflon tape. Silicone gasket maker is a very bad idea when you're around fuel, because what I've always been taught is fuel will dissolve silicone. So you want to thread in with the opened end going away from the direction that you're twisting or turning the nut there. If you turn it this way, it'll just bunch up and it won't seal. Since I've had trouble getting this one to seal, I'll put some extra Teflon tape on it. Don't want to forget this washer here. And open end towards the fuel line against the spring. On this one, it's a 1-inch nut there. And I ran into some problems because I was using old parts, and as you can see on this one, the thing that stands out the most is the threads gave way inside here, or the sheet metal cracked, and so I couldn't get it to stop leaking. Out of frustration, I used fuel safe epoxy, and inside and outside, leaving making sure that this is not blocked. I put the epoxy inside and outside of the threads and the inside of this chamber, just in case there's a crack too. And then I screwed it on. I made sure that the nut was not the problem by screwing it into my spare parts carburetor body, and then I epoxied the outside too. It's not pretty, it's not right, but it worked, and I was very frustrated that day. So that's one problem that I ran into. That's another big problem that I ran into was these foam floats. After some time, they start absorbing fuel, and once they start doing that, you can't adjust it according to specs. It's just not going to, it's just never going to be right. You have to trial and error if you want to keep using these, but it's pointless to keep using these, because once they start absorbing the fuel and dropping lower into the gas, the process will continue, and it will keep going out of adjustment over the years. Basically, these are one use, according to some carburetor sites who want to sell you new floats, but my experience is they're one use also. So I had to order a new float. The brass ones are stock for the 70s, as far as I know. Once they start corroding, they leak, and that's why many of them have been replaced by now. But to test these for leaks, you just submerge it in the fuel bowl when you take the carburetor apart, or if that's not possible, then just spray carb cleaner or some liquid on it and check, see if you hear any liquid sloshing around when you shake it next to your ear. So the important thing about getting the throttle plate on is to make sure it closes completely, like that. And also, you'll notice in the past I rebushed these, and I had put fuel safe epoxy on it, just make sure there are no vacuum leaks. After 50 years, many of these, if they've seen any amount of normal use, will probably be have elongated or expanded holes for the throttle rod, and they'll be leaking vacuum. It's also important to make sure that if you use the epoxy to help seal the bushings after putting them in, that they don't impede the turning of the throttle rod. Normally you don't want to reuse these gaskets. If they're old, like a year old or more, or if you've cleaned, soaked, sprayed it with carburetor cleaner or soaked it, it should be replaced. This is only a week old though, so it should be okay to reuse. A kit will often come with more than one application for these carburetors, and so just use the one that matches up with the holes in your the carburetor that you have. So once you've lined it back up, there's two screws that hold the bottom assembly on. Once you have this on the vehicle, it's going to be very difficult to tighten these back up, and once the carburetor heats up, there's a good chance that these screws will work loose a little bit, and it could cause a vacuum leak. Once it's on the vehicle, the only way you'll be able to tighten these is to use one of these. So just get the screws seated and then crank them down. For these two, they're big screws, so they could take a little more pressure than the normal screws. If you're going to soak the main body of the carburetor here, you should pull off all the rubber and plastic, of course, but also there's the idle compensator. There's a little cork gasket that goes in there, and you should take that out too. If you mess yours up, then online carburetor sites like Quadrajet parts will sell these, but they also come in carburetor rebuild kits. There's a recess in there, and you just make sure it's seated in that recess, and then you just put it in. Some of them, according to diagrams, have screws that hold it in place. This one doesn't. Next, I'm going to replace this little gasket on the accelerator pump, and you just tear it off. I've already gotten it loose, but just pushes in and is held in by these things. And carburetor kit, of course, will come with, or should come with the new thing, the new little pump thing there, and even comes with a little tool to get it in place, which in this case isn't really necessary. You can see it's in there. It's pretty easy to replace that part. And you can also you can also buy the assembly here online, even if the rebuild kit doesn't have the a good replacement accelerator pump. So it goes in there. The ball for so the fuel goes in, it gets pushed in here, pushes the ball up, and sprays into the carburetor. So there's a little T and spring that go over the ball. Push that in, and it's held in place by once you put this on. Now for metering rods. So this is the metering rod. The jet's right here, and a metering rod, and then the assembly that pushes it up and down. The jet here, the size, you probably can't see it, is printed on top, and the metering rod is goes down in size, and so that as the it rests inside the jet, and as the this is like mid throttle and then high throttle for the thinnest part to let more gas in. The size will be on here. This is a 103. I think it's a 103 or 104. No, this is a 104 jet and a 78 metering rod, which is close to the late 60s Monojet stock. You could change it out by pulling it up and pulling it out through that notch. The jet is down at the bottom of the bowl there, and you just screw it in. Make sure that you don't strip it, of course. For the metering rod assembly on a Monojet, this rod here will stick outside the carburetor at the bottom and attached to the throttle plate. It'll be pushed up and down through here. When you put the accelerator pump in, it needs a spring to push it back up, like that. And then this rod will line up there and keep it pushed down. Now for this assembly, there's a spring, and the spring should be in there too. Goes in there like that. Get that rod lined up in the notch, and then line up the metering rod with the jet. Be careful not to bend the tip of the jet. For this step, it's good to get these little rods on the end of the throttle plate in the right position before you start. This goes on the outside corner. If you forget, you can look on Google and find one that's assembled already. And the one that I found from Henco Rebuilders looked like this. So you'll need to push these rods down so that you can access them. And make sure that the jet and metering rod is in the jet, and then you could see where the rods are. Okay, so now I finally got lined up. The little rod's going for the metering rod, and this one goes to the accelerator pump. And now I just need to screw that plate in. I need to move this to make sure that these are everything's moving okay, that's closing okay, not impeded in any way, and it seems to be okay. So I'll tighten it down. So at this point, it's time to do the metering rod adjustment. With the throttle closed and this swung over as far as it'll go, so it's over the top of the surface there without the gasket on. You use the measurement on this one for a Chevy truck with manual transmission in 1970 is 5/64. Now, if you notice on this carburetor measuring thing that came with the kit, this is in 30 seconds, so it's not going to be up here. It's actually going to be 5/64 will actually be between 2 and 3 30 seconds. So it'll actually be down here. Now for the float. You put the wire through, the rod through, it'll hold the float will pivot on. And then there's a little wire piece on the end of this here, and that hangs on the end of the float in that notch. If you could get it in, then just hold that in place and line it up so it drops in its matching piece. And then there's a notch here, and then make sure everything's lined up so that it could go up and down without problem. This is catching on something, so I need to figure out why it's not lined up and fix it. You see now it goes up and down without problem, so everything's lined up. And holding this and pushing that down, I can make the adjustment once I find the measuring thing. But it needs to be in the place that will be when it's together, and it'll be at the other end against there. This is supposed to be adjusted to 1/4 for this application. It's actually already there. That's 8/32 is 1/4. So the float's adjusted. If you have to adjust it, then the place to adjust it is over here at the pivot point. You adjust the float or the other side down or up to adjust that. Okay, so now for the top gasket for the carburetor. One thing important to note: if you get the float too high, then fuel will flood over the top of the bowl, or even worse, it'll get into the bore and you'll have a racing problem, or engine racing problem. So carefully get that in. There's two raised parts to line it up with, and then need to work on the air horn. I'm switching air horns on this. There's a vent right here, and it goes out. Some later applications will have a PCV system attached to it, and there's even a place for the nozzle to go. They don't seem to make these anymore, but there's a little wax paper thing that goes in the air horn like that, and then that metal thing to hold it in place, and that'll have to be pressed in a little bit. So the purpose of this vent in the air horn is just to prevent vacuum from building up inside the float assembly and all this stuff, because that'll make it harder for the carburetor to meter the fuel correctly and precisely. In later years, for emissions requirements, they put this part of the PCV system, and Quadrajets actually have this inside the air in between the bores, and so it's they don't have to worry about venting it outside. This part right here, this notch, goes to the metering rod. Quadrajet's even more tricky, if I remember right, to try to get all that stuff lined up correctly. There are 3 long screws, 3 short screws, and just put it on, seat it. Make sure that you never, once you get the float adjusted, don't turn the carburetor upside down or shake it. Don't want to do anything that'll throw off that float adjustment, otherwise there will be problems. And of course you don't crank each screw down right away, but just get it in, get seated. And the pattern is actually, for tightening, is the middle, and then in a circular pattern going out, do the bore next. Once you get the screws in for the bore, then you go around to the bowl. And of course I'm not tightening it yet because I want to get them all seated first before tightening. Just go around, tighten it, and the middle, then the bore, and then go around once more. Make sure everything is still tight after tightening it down. And you should probably go through this process again on the top plate or air horn after the carburetor has warmed up the first time you run it, because these screws can loosen up, and once they start loosening up, then you have a vacuum leak. And that by itself, the loose screws on the carburetor, will cause your car to run poorly. Now we have the carburetor together mostly, but there's still this one. I have a manual choke, and so that's part of why I went to this different air horn. Also, it doesn't have the rubber diaphragm that could cause vacuum leaks. Now this is pretty much done assembling. I've kept all the vacuum ports. This one won't be used on my vehicle. This is vacuum advanced, and this won't be used. I wound up, I'm just going to use a manual choke. I'm not going to use the fast idle cam on this after all. I've attached the spring and adjusted the idle down so it's just touching the throttle, the idle speed screw. And now the last thing is I'm going to adjust the idle mixture in till it, oops. So last step, and of course I'm careful not to turn the carburetor upside down because I don't want to throw off the float, is to turn the idle mixture in gently. I don't want to tighten it because then I'll mess up the cone. So just get to a touch, and I turn it out 2 full turns. That's 1 full turn, 1.5, 2. And then once I get it running, it'll be time to do the final adjustments. So that's my rebuild of a Monojet.